There is a phrase Ray Dalio has been repeating in public for the past year, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. There is now nearly universal agreement that the post 1945 world order has broken down. That is not a fringe opinion from an anonymous trader on social media. That is the founder of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world, a man who built his career on studying exactly these kinds of shifts. This video is a plain language walk through what Dalio has actually said, in his own words, over the past year and a half, and what he has said people might do about it. Nothing here is financial advice. It is a report on public statements drawn from interviews, books, and posts that anyone can look up. Where numbers or quotes appear, they come from Dalio himself or from journalists who interviewed him directly, and the sources are named as we go. Alio Capital. Let's start with the framework Dalio uses to explain almost everything else he says. He calls it the big cycle.
He has studied 500 years of history and found that monetary orders, political orders, and geopolitical orders all rise, evolve, and collapse in a repeating pattern, typically lasting about 75 years, give or take about 30. He is not shy about how serious he thinks this moment is. He has said that the times ahead will be radically different from what most people are used to, more like the chaotic years before 1945 than the decades of relative calm the world enjoyed after. Most people, he says, are shocked by what is unfolding right now. He is not. He says he has seen this movie before. Tradinki, so what actually drives this cycle, according to him? Across 5 centuries, he says he kept finding the same pattern. Big debt cycles are driven by debt and the interest owed on that debt growing faster than people's incomes. Eventually, that squeezes out normal spending, which causes problems paying that debt, which forces spending to shrink further. And when that happens at the same time, a government has issued a huge amount of bonds, more than buyers actually want to hold. The result is not complicated. Too much supply and not enough demand pushes the value of the debt and the currency down. That is the mechanical heart of his entire warning. It has nothing to do with drama. It is closer to a math problem that eventually forces a choice. Tradinki and Dalio has stated that choice plainly. Speaking with reporters at Davos this year, he framed the position national leaders eventually land in as a stark binary. Do you print money, or do you let a debt crisis happen? Historically, he argues, countries with the power to print their own money almost always choose the first option. They print, and when a currency's supply increases faster than the real wealth behind it, each unit of that currency is worth a little less than it was before. Alio Capital Dalio does not think this is only a monetary story. He has laid out what he sees as 5 separate forces, all pushing at once. Talking through them at the World Government Summit in Dubai earlier this year, he described the debt and money cycle as the deepest one, with debt built up to critical levels and the monetary system under structural pressure. The second is domestic politics. He points to widening income and wealth inequality, rising polarization, and declining trust in institutions, which he says makes it harder for any government to make the tough fiscal choices needed to actually fix a debt problem. The third is the reshaping of the global order between competing powers. The fourth is rapid technological change. The fifth is natural disasters and their economic aftershocks. Right now, he argues, all 5 forces are running hot at the same time and they are reinforcing each other, which he says pushes both uncertainty and fragility to levels that are historically unusual. Fortune +2, the politics piece, is where Dalio has used some of his sharpest language. Writing about internal conflict inside the United States, he has described the country as already being in a kind of civil war phase, with factions unwilling to compromise and a level of ability to hurt each other economically, legally, digitally, and even physically that he considers historically unusual. He has pointed to a bankrupt government balance sheet, a large wealth gap, and rising state versus federal conflict as some of the clearest historical warning signs that a society is moving into open internal disorder. On social media, he put it even more directly in a post analysts widely noted at the time: the changing world order is approaching stage 6, the war stage. Medium +2, that framing about stages is not a throwaway line. It is central to how Dalio talks about where any given empire sits in its life cycle. He tracks 6 stages, from a nation's early rise to its eventual internal and external unraveling. And in interviews earlier this year, he said the United States is deep into stage 5 and teetering on the edge of stage 6, the stage where internal and external order actually break down. He is careful, though, about not turning this into a prediction of a specific date. In his book, How Countries Go Broke, he wrote that the short-term probability of an immediate crisis is low, but that the long-term risk is very high and approaching a point of no return. Analysts who follow his work closely have generally read that as meaning the danger window sits somewhere in the next few years, not this Monday. Medium debt is the number Dalio keeps returning to, because it is the number he says forces everything else. He has pointed repeatedly to the United States' roughly $38 to $39 trillion national debt as a hallmark of what he calls late-stage cycle imbalances, the same kind of imbalance he says has preceded downturns throughout history. He connects that debt directly to a breakdown in confidence around the dollar's role in the woe. RLD, speaking at the World Government Summit in Dubai, he described the world as facing not a Cold War or even a trade war but what he calls a capital war, where countries attack each other's economies by controlling the flow of money rather than the flow of bullets. We are on the brink, he said. That means not in, but it means we are quite close to it, and it would be very easy to go over the brink into capital war because there are mutual fears. The acquirer's multiple plus 2 part of what worries Dalio is the mechanics of who actually buys U.S. debt going forward. He has noted that Treasury bonds have been the bedrock of global reserves for decades, but that the sheer supply of new debt the U.S. is issuing is running into a shrinking global appetite to hold it. There's a supply-demand issue, he said, adding, you can't ignore the possibility that maybe there's not the same inclination to buy U.S. debt. He ties that reluctance to geopolitics directly. He has argued that in times of international tension, even allies become reluctant to hold each other's debt, preferring to move their money into hard currencies instead, which forces the country issuing that debt to essentially buy its own bonds by printing money to do it. He summarized that dynamic bluntly: we're increasingly buying our own money. Medium plus 3. Now let's talk about the historical comparison Dalio reaches for most often, because he thinks it is the cleanest one available. He points to 1971. That was the year President Nixon severed the dollar's direct link to gold, at a time when inflation, heavy debt, and government spending were already eroding investor confidence in the currency, leaving gold as the asset that actually held its value through the transition. He has drawn a direct line from that moment to today. Since 1971, Dalio notes, governments have consistently chosen to print money rather than let debt crises play out on their own, a pattern of behavior that emerges specifically when debt service payments start rising faster than people's incomes and squeeze spending. The acquirer's multiple medium Dalio has also reached for a more recent comparison, one tied to a specific incident rather than a decades-long trend. The Suez Crisis of 1956, when Britain's failed intervention in Egypt exposed just how much its global financial power had already slipped. Analysts covering Dalio's commentary have noted that he has explicitly said the United States just had its own Suez moment, a single event that reveals a decline that had already been happening quietly underneath the surface for years. Whether or not you agree with that comparison, it is the historical anchor he himself has chosen to use. So where does all of this land Dalio on gold, consistently and specifically? In one recent interview, he offered direct guidance. Most investors should have between 5% and 15% of their portfolio in gold or in alternative money. He has explained his reasoning for that number in fairly simple terms. Because gold is a diversifier, when the bad times come along it does uniquely well, and when the good times are prosperous less so, but it's an effective diversifier, he said. I'd say the most important thing is to have a well-diversified portfolio. Elsewhere, he has described gold in even simpler terms. He calls it the only asset that is not someone else's liability. Every stock is a claim on a company. Every bond is a promise from a borrower. Cash in a bank is a claim on that bank. Gold in his framing is not a claim on anyone. It just sits there, holding its value, independent of whether some other institution keeps its promises. Fortune plus 2. He has also pointed to what large institutions, not retail investors, are actually doing with their own money right now. He has cited central banks altering their reserve holdings and buying gold as concrete evidence of a breakdown in the monetary order, not just a rhetorical claim. He argues this is not some one-off emotional trade, but a collective response from central banks and large institutions rethinking how much safety margin the monetary system actually has, and that in recent years central banks around the world have been buying gold at a large scale, gradually substituting it for U.S. holdings. In his telling, gold has effectively become the world's second largest reserve asset after the dollar itself. Medium plus 2. It is worth being precise about what Dalio is and is not claiming here because it matters. He has stressed that his view on gold is not about short-term price swings. It is about long-run structural shifts in the monetary system, in debt structures, and in geopolitics. He's not making a trading call for next month. He's describing what he thinks happens to money over a period of years, sometimes decades, when a system like this one is under this kind of strain. Fortune. He has also been explicit about what happens to the other side of the ledger, He The people holding paper debt instead of hard assets when a currency gets debased this way. In his book, Why Countries Go Broke, he wrote that when the cost of servicing debt keeps outstripping income growth, a system really only has two exits: default or printing money to debase the currency. And historically, countries that control their own currency have almost always chosen the second path. The pattern that follows, he says, has been remarkably consistent throughout history. Holders of paper debt lose out, while holders of gold and real, tangible assets tend to hold onto their purchasing power. Fortune, none of this means Dalio is purely pessimistic. He has been careful to note the other side of what he sees happening at the same time as the debt strain. He has described the current moment as a bifurcation between a decaying monetary order on one hand and what he calls a genuinely wonderful technological revolution on the other. Two very different stories, in his view, unfolding on top of each other.